Our next speaker for today, we have Mr. Avinash Rao, VP of Products from Digite Inc. Avinash Rao is a DevOps and Agile transformation leader and enterprise agility expert with 22 years of IT development and transformation experience. A DevOps Institute ambassador, Avinash holds the Black Blot Master Product Management Professional credential. He is also Kanban University KMP2 certified, a DASA certified DevOps coach, and DOISRE Foundation certified. Avinash has demonstrated competencies in transforming client and internal organizations, leading and coaching for results, and in using DevOps, Agile, and Kanban techniques to deliver business value. Avinash is a thought leader who speaks frequently in industry forums and has deep expertise in achieving enterprise agility at scale. His topic for today is succeeding at DevOps at scale.
Hi, I'm Avinash Rao. I lead products at Digite. And I'm really happy here at the DevOps India Summit to be speaking at Succeeding at DevOps at Scale, communicating the value of DevOps, which is one of the really key parts of succeeding at scale. So as we dive in, I just want you to take a second and think about, is there trouble in DevOps land? If you look at a lot of the headlines recently, you'll see these things that says real world DevOps failures, how to avoid them, 5 biggest ways to fail at DevOps, 6 key reasons enterprises fail with DevOps implementations. You see a bit of a pattern here. Most people seem to have between 4 and 6 key reasons why DevOps transformations fail. And there's a lot more out there. So why is it that organizations are not getting the value that they expected to get from DevOps? Now, if you think about or go into the details as to why people are saying that DevOps transformations fail, you'll see a lot of interesting insights. You'll see that Gartner says that 75% of DevOps initiatives will fail to meet expectations due to issues around organizational learning and change. The same Gartner says that through 2023, 90% of DevOps initiatives will fail to fully meet expectations due to the limitations of leadership approaches, not technical reasons. Again, according to another article from Gartner. Another very popular thing that whether you look at these 4 reasons or these 5 reasons or 6 reasons why DevOps initiatives fails, it talks about something around not creating a DevOps culture. But I want to spend a little time today on asking the question that are we partly externalizing the problem? Because a lot of DevOps initiatives, and I'm speaking as somebody who's been part of many DevOps initiatives of DevOps rollouts, is that we seem to be saying that an external they don't have vision, that they don't do change management, that they are limited in this leadership, that they are not creating a DevOps culture, and so on. In the beginning of any industry, you have many of these teams who are experimenting with tools. But while there's still a fair amount of movement in tooling, I think we've reached a stage where tool changes are really to be able to obtain new capabilities in order to really be able to get additional items, which is beyond a baseline. And that baseline is actually fairly well set in DevOps. We now have tooling which is very stable, which is very reliable, and has shown itself that it can scale to a great extent. So if it's not with tooling, then clearly we have to look at what other things are making DevOps transformation succeed or fail. One of the things that we always miss out is that in order to land a transformation, the items that come in are very different from what is needed to pilot or start a transformation. In other parts of the industry, we have figured out that there is something called discovery-driven planning. We recognize that when you're planning for a new venture, it involves envisioning the unknown. And where there is significant amount of uncertainty, a different approach is needed than for conventional planning. In conventional planning, and we have seen this in the agile world as well, it's always about, we know what we want, here's how we're going to get there, and here's the roadmap to get there. Too much of DevOps has operated in that manner, unfortunately. You have all these DevOps approaches. The consultants go in and they say that, you know what, here's the value that you're going to get from DevOps. We're going to do it with one team, scale it to 8 teams, then roll it out across your organization. Maybe work with a center of excellence that will centralize all the tooling, and it'll offer it as a service to the rest of the organization who can do self-serve. Does that sound familiar? It does, right? But one of the things we have to think about is, if you compare this with what happens in traditional planning, we treat as though there is no discovery when it comes to DevOps transformation. And that applies only to the tooling portion of the DevOps transformation. The other parts of a DevOps transformation are very much aligned with a traditional transformation, which means that there will be discovery, there will be surprises, and we have to be able to account for those as we go through the entire process. One of my favorite examples comes from, let's say, the 1910s or 20s, when the internal combustion engine really took off and there were cars were really coming. But in a lot of places around the world, you had transportation, which was primarily horse-drawn buggies. And this was the time in the 1910s or the 1920s when cars were just coming in and beginning to threaten horse-drawn carriages. One of the interesting things that happened is that there was a choice that people had to make. And they could adopt these slightly unreliable new cars, or they could continue running their businesses, which were essentially horse-drawn buggies. Now, the problem with any disruptive transformation is that when the disruption enters, there's very little of the kind of quality that has already been established by the players who've been in the market, who've matured, etc. At that time, if you were a consultant, we would go in and we would say that, hey, let me help you, dear horse and buggy companies. We have this program. It's called the Faster Horse Program, trademark, right? The Faster Horse Program is going to increase your horse productivity by 30%, your revenues by 20%. Don't bother with those pesky cars, right? Because we can clearly envision a future when you have a better version of the current offering. But it's very hard to say that, you know what, there's a new technology that's come in, it is improving rapidly, and over time it will clearly displace our current modes of operation. So we better align to it, or at least begin to understand it. And that is the essential role of leadership. Because if you abdicate that responsibility, what you will see is that the organization continues to work and continues to work in good faith. It continues to work hard in building out faster horses. They may even come up with scheduling improvements, which says that our horses are now carrying passengers more of the time. We're now able to feed them better so that they can, pull higher loads, etc. But the end of the day, there is no choice but to be replaced by a different technology. And something similar is happening with DevOps. If you look at a lot of DevOps adoption, the DevOps adoption is very much on the lines of the faster horse problem, that people look at it as purely an incremental change. It can be done without any disruption to the current ways of work. And all we're going to do is make a little tweak here, make a little tweak there, measure certain metrics which tend to be fairly localized, and then say that we've achieved DevOps. And that, if viewed from a top management or an executive management perspective, is a huge problem. No wonder you get those headlines where everybody's talking about the number of DevOps transformations that are failing. But having said that, leadership does have another very clear role, which cannot be performed by the other levels of the organization, and that is coalition building. Any existing setup does have a set of people who are responsible for whose win really depends on continuing the way things are currently. And they will be extremely, extremely resistant to any new thing which comes in and disrupts that way of working. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just human nature. But the role of leadership is to be able to bring those people on to a coalition where we are able to say that here's the new way of work, here's the new responsibilities that people have. Part of the problem with that is that our increasing efforts at automation does disrupt the status quo. There's absolutely no getting away from it. And I think what leaders must do is to have at least the clarity or take some of those decisions with clarity early on, because now we've got enough transformation knowledge under our belt, enough working knowledge of DevOps that we understand what works and what doesn't. Finally, putting these two elements together, you must have one scorecard. Because it's great to have this vision out there in the distance, and we're going to replace our entire buggy business with the car business. We're going to replace completely the way we do today, which is a lot of silos which hand code from one silo to another, to this new world of having DevOps where developers get feedback instantly and that you're able to deploy with one click to production. It's great to be able to do that. But how do you get from here to there, and what are the measurements along the way? That's where scorecards come in. And these scorecards are different for every organization depending on what you want to accomplish. But unless you want to accomplish something very trivial, you will have to think beyond the very basic measurements of how much time it used to take and how much time the same activity now takes. Here's one guideline that I often use. If all that DevOps has done is improved the values, the timing, the performance of the same individual states that existed before a DevOps implementation, then it isn't a DevOps implementation. It definitely isn't a DevOps transformation. For you to really think about an overall view of your entire process and then imagine how we can automate it from end to end, that is what gives us the value in any DevOps transformation. Scorecards are a huge part of that. Now, goals really frame the technology as an opportunity for the business. I'll share a brief anecdote. Many years ago, I was a consultant and I was young and ambitious, and I had done this small bit of automation where I had written a web service wrapper over a mainframe, and what used to take about 2 weeks with the manual process now used to happen in a few minutes. And I was really happy about that. I was very proud about that. So I went to my boss and said, "Look, I've done all this great work, and so I want to be able to showcase this to client senior management." Obviously, the direct people I was working with knew about it already. So my boss set up a meeting with the client VP, and he invited his entire leadership team. And so we are all in this really nice boardroom, and I give a 15-minute presentation where I said, "We have made all these changes. Look, this is how life used to be for you. This is how life is now." And then the VP looks over to his finance guy, Jim, and he says, "Jim, with all these great things Avinash has done, did my profits go up?" And Jim, the serious accounting guy, says, "No." So the VP says, "With all these great things Avinash has done, has my costs in the books come down?" Jim says, "No." "Have my revenues gone up?" Says, "No." And I'm sitting there thinking, it's an engines business. The technology that we're doing is a portion of the engines business. So how can your revenues go up right away? And so the VP turns to me and says, "Avinash, you've done all this great thing. And these are good things. We should continue doing them. But if you really think about it, it is at best optimization of a certain part of my value. It's a local optima. What I need really for a transformation in my business is for you to see that I run a business end to end and see what are the opportunities for technology there is in order to really drive value across from end to end, which is a much harder problem than coming in and say, I've got this build system. It now takes 17 minutes. I'm going to automate it and now it's going to take 3 minutes, right? So what we have to do and is that I'm going to look at a certain structure which has worked in the past and apply that to DevOps. And we're going to talk about what each of these 5 things do that together communicate the value of DevOps and really improve the chances of succeeding. So the operating experience is something that we have to define, and not just define for the developers, but for developers, for managers, for DevOps managers who are responsible for that part of the entire IT or business, and for the overall business itself. We just have this focus on technical outputs and outcomes for developers. I've seen some cases where we have some information for managers, but that tends to be operational information rather than directional information. It's very rare to find DevOps implementations where we say, here's the operating experience for the business. And unless you have defined an operating experience for the business, you really can't come back 15 months later and say, hey, the business hasn't been impacted by all these improvements that we are making. Right? Unless you have a formal view into DevOps for the business, it may be very hard later to be able to go in and say, here's the value that we delivered. Part of the problem is that we frame it entirely as something that has to be done inside IT. In that case, let's be honest, it's probably not going to deliver any value to the business, right? Unless you have a very clear view and create an operating experience saying, hey, dear business, this is how the changes that we are making in DevOps will really be able to give you the value that you desire from IT. The second thing is to focus on specific problems, identify outcomes and progress metrics. There was this particular customer I was working with, and we said that, you'll be able to deploy with one click into production. And they said, but we don't necessarily need to deploy from one click into production because the nature of our business is such that there are some external dependencies which are out of the control or influence of this particular group. And if they're regulatory, it may be even outside the purview of senior management. That we have to identify what outcomes we are aiming for and the progress metrics that will get us there. Similar to a view that you get into a pipeline when it's running, you also need to be very clear in terms of what it is that people are tracking over a period of time, both for developers, for managers, as well as for the business. We tend again to overserve developers. Over time, with enough pressure, we are now beginning to serve managers, at least in terms of seeing over time how certain metrics are stacking up. But we still are fairly behind the curve when it comes to identifying outcomes and progress metrics for the business. I still see too many people saying that here are the 4 DORA metrics, we're going to measure them. And even those can be fairly hard to measure, at least when you're beginning in the entire overall journey. The third item is to identify your competition. And this competition is both internal as well as external. Because rightly or wrongly, every transformation you make is measured against the current state. And if you can't show an improvement over the current state, then really people will come back and say, hey, how much are we doing better than what we were? Has it been worth all this amount of money that we put into this transformation? And that is something that we must be able to answer. Too many companies, too many projects, too many transformations go back and start searching for that at a later point of time when the question gets asked, and by then it's really too late. So value stream management is one approach that's increasingly being used to cut across the blur of incremental improvements. Because if you just add up all these incremental improvements, they may or may not showcase and improve, we may not be able to showcase an improvement across the entire value chain. And VSM is a great opportunity for us to utilize in order to drive that. So looking for platforms, right? Very few systems exist in isolation. We have to be able to understand that we are part of an ecosystem. We're usually very good at showing what's happening inside our particular system, our particular product. But in a system like DevOps, where you have many, many different constituent parts, and each of them are interacting with each other in real time, we have to be able to think about how the ecosystem will evolve. Otherwise, the sheer effort of keeping it updated, bringing that data in, that tends to become overwhelming very quickly, unless there's already been a thought in terms of how we're going to bring that data in. Is there a common place we're going to put all that, and to be able to visualize all that? The other thing is that mistakes are very visible, given the promise that we make that everything's going to be so transparent with the DevOps implementation. It used to be that a lot of items were hidden in the old process and would actually show up, because at the end of the day, the laws of physics still apply. But now they become visible in real time, and it leads to people questioning that, look, our old system just seemed so much more stable than this new system that you've brought in. Finally, we need to test our assumptions. We test our code that we write, but we rarely, if ever, test the assumptions that we have made at the start of the journey. And that's where these elements of discovery really come in. And if you don't have a formal process in place to be able to keep looking at those assumptions, keep looking at those discoveries, and looking at how we're going to respond to them, very soon we'll find that we are hostage to many of these discoveries, because we are then in a situation where the results of these discoveries are being felt by various stakeholders. They're coming and asking us, here's a change that's happened, and we didn't expect or desire this change. How will you respond? Then we go and dig up things and then try to find how things were supposed to be, how things are, why they are. But it's never good to be able to go back with excuses and explanations. And it's much better if we are in a place where we are proactively able to understand the things that are changing and to be able to respond back to the business. I'll talk very briefly about a case study. I've covered many of those items as we've gone through the session. But a part of building this entire infrastructure for DevOps, and I don't mean the provisioning the clouds, is to be able to think about how we will build visibility and to whom through the entire life cycle, right? While there is a case for self-serve, we must be able to adopt something, stabilize something, and then offer self-serve. However, many organizations, particularly with COEs, tend to think about it as a very static process. That they say that here's this the COE, it's now built up this massive infrastructure, and we're now going to be able to serve many stakeholders, preferably via self-service to keep costs down. That is a very static view of the world. Given the amount of churn and development and the new capabilities which are coming in, and with the desire of companies to move further ahead with things like SRE and the benefits that they promise, there will always be a continuous inflow of additional tooling, of additional integrations, which will keep coming in. And that can very quickly overwhelm these teams. So I've already spoken a little bit about the COEs who can no longer dictate these transformations. And I think this entire notion that you have these defined set of enterprise tools and everybody in the enterprise will do that is something that is causing a lot of disruption and trouble. Because one, there's just so many new tools coming in, new capabilities coming in, and teams want to innovate. They want to be able to adopt those things in order to get their benefits. I'll end with one particular thought, which is that, and this is happening in DevOps, it's happening everywhere else with data being the new oil. But what is that oil really being used for? Data is helping organizations in 3 stages. That in the beginning, the data, and there's a huge amount of data that's coming out of our DevOps pipelines, is used to assist in decision making. This is the dashboarding stage. This says that, this is how much the pipeline run times are, and this is your comparison across multiple pipelines, right? It's very, very descriptive. The second stage of the data journey is the augment stage, where we are able to augment decision making by saying that, hey, the entire process took this long. Now we're taking this long. Here's a comparison between multiple runs at multiple times of the day, and then look for either anomalies or interesting patterns, and to be able to showcase that, right? Which is not just descriptive, but there's some intelligence involved in making sense of that data. And the final stage that we are fairly far away from is the automate stage, where the system itself will be able to take certain decisions. And this may be both in terms of provisioning, it may be in terms of behavior as well, to multiple stakeholders, or to be able to send communications automatically to multiple stakeholders. And that's the automate phase. In DevOps, we are very much in the assist phase at the moment, and we're moving towards the augment phase. The future is here, but it's just not, evenly distributed yet, right? So as we move into the augment and automate journeys, business stakeholders will continue to be very disappointed unless we are able to plan for, build, and articulate the value of DevOps. And that's the only way to succeed at scale in DevOps. I'm Avinash Rao at the DevOps India Summit. It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you very much.